Isolated from the rest of the universe, and skulking in caves and lurking in the darkness, a people from another world live in wretched conditions, in order to hide their existence from those who would deem them as villains, holding themselves to a promise made from the heart of a dead man. Inside the caverns held a vast array of religious and cultist imagery, patterns, symbols, and words carved into the walls that foretold of a prophecy that one day their saviour would appear in the heavens to save them from the darkness and return to a home once lost and claim what was rightfully theirs. These people were known as the followers of Havoc, a cult that held on to a promise forgotten to time of the final victory they were meant to manifest and defeat those who brought them to ruin. Decades had passed since they fled, and since that time no progress had been made. Their days consisted of praying and making sacrifices to try and appease their false gods, but to no avail. Yet in all that time they did not flag nor fail. They had remained persistent, knowing that one day the prophecy would come true, and that it would be upon a day unlike any other that their prophecy came to be. In the deepest point of the caverns was a large open space, pillars of rock holding the ground above them, the only light coming from the torches that hung on the walls, as well as a few candle-lit chandeliers hanging by chains from the ceiling. In the centre of the room was a cracked stone bed, an altar, with more cultist symbols and words carved into the sides of it. Atop the bed was a person clad in a long dark robe that stretched onto the floor. Around their chest was a glowing pendant that inside held a sample of an ancient magic once used long ago. Blindfolded by the others, this person has remained on the altar for some time. Whether they had been there for days, weeks, months, or even years, not even they could remember. A day had come when this acolyte started rambling and raving of voices speaking to them in their mind. Anyone not of this cult would have called them insane, but to the followers of Havoc, they saw this as the beginning they had been waiting for. The acolyte speaks the words spoken in their mind, that beyond their world, deep in the blackened void, they are waiting for retrieval. A small handful of cultists began leaving the cavern and started setting out to acquire a star cruiser and set out for the stars. After finding one such craft, they blasted off out into the ether to begin their search. Hours would pass by, only countable from the clock on board the ship, for without it, time would be as easily lost as anyone wandering the vast expanse. With them they brought the acolyte that would act as a navigational system to hopefully bring them closer to whoever it was they were looking for. More hours passed by, and they were beginning to now run out of both hope and fuel as the crew ponders on turning back to report the bad news. However, the acolyte protested and urged them to travel just a little longer. The monotone voice reached out their hand and pointed towards the glass cockpit. The pilots pondered on what exactly it was they should be looking for, as from where they were, it seemed to be the same endless void they had spent the past many hours travelling. Nevertheless, they pressed onward, and they were thankful they had. Floating aimlessly ahead of them was a small infant child, but it quickly dawned upon them that the child must have been without air for several hours now. Bringing the ship around to the airlock, they proceed to open the door and bring the child inside, as it slowly descended to the ship floor. Once sealed, they entered the airlock to check on the child. The situation was bleak. The child wasn't breathing, and they weren't sure if the grey skin tone was natural or a foreboding sign of the worst outcome. One cultist started to feel a pulse by placing 2 fingers on the child's wrist. But it was not to be. Turning back to face the others, dismay was written across their face. The child was dead. Remaining silent, everyone took the news like a bullet to the heart. Almost everyone. A frantic voice vehemently protests against the news as they plead that there must be something they can do to resolve the matter. Alas, the crew denied as they claimed there was nothing that could be done. Eventually, an argument ensues as the acolyte argues with the members of the crew, hallowing at them, proclaiming them as heathens who would spit in the face of the cause. But just then, within their maddened mind, the acolyte heard another whisper calling out to them. The pendant is the key. Removing it from their neck, they hold it up as they all begin looking toward it. Inspecting the casing for a latch, they quickly discover the only way to access what was inside was to break the pendant. Hesitance then arise among them all. The pendant was one of a kind. Should they break it, there are no other means to procure another. However, the acolyte sees no other alternative, and so with great force they throw it to the ground as the casing cracks apart, allowing for the golden light to escape. As it floated among the remains of the pendant in all its glory, they could not help but watch as its splendor begins to flow toward the child, crawling up its body as it began to seep into them, making their skin glow faintly. Several stomach-wrenching seconds went by as hope was becoming bleaker and bleaker, until suddenly, coughing could be heard coming from the child as it started crying from the pain and disorientation of not knowing where it was. The cultists all let out a sigh of relief. Now, they could return home with the good news that the child was safe, and that the prophecy was just beginning.